Hello and welcome to Green Pass Gaming. I am Flap. This is the Green Pass Gaming midweek catch-up, and I should be joined by Puxley.
Yes, I am here. Hello, Flap. How are you doing?
Excellent. Yes, very good. Thank you. We are less than a week. Currently, as recording, we are 5 days away from the next generation. So it's getting very exciting, and Twitter's getting excited, and yeah, the hype's building to unpalpable levels.
Oh yeah, it's so close now, less than a week, and I think today is actually the day when I believe some of the review embargoes for the Series X have lifted, and I've been spending some time today watching the videos and reading stuff, and everyone has had nothing but good things to say about the new system. So it's even more reason to get excited about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely agree. So I guess we haven't had a huge flurry of information that we didn't already know. So this is kind of all based on people's opinions of what they feel of the system, mainly the Series X. Jeff Grubb did do one on the Series S as well. But yeah, it's all positive, really. I think one thing that surprised people is the storage capacity on the Series S, but we'll come on to that during this show, to be honest. So we're going to have a bit of a chat about that. But kicking off today's show, we're going to talk about Nintendo Direct Mini and some of the news that had. What was that all about?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about one key thing here. So the Nintendo Direct Mini was the last Nintendo Direct showcase of the year, as they stated. That was last week. But two main things which are of interest have come out of this. So during that Direct, it was announced that both Hitman 3 and Control were going to come to the Switch, which you think, oh, wow, that's pretty good because they're pretty demanding games. How are they going to bring that to the system? But the answer, according to these developers and publishers, is cloud, solely through the cloud. So through the Nintendo Switch directly, Control is going to have an Ultimate Edition cloud version, and the same with Hitman 3 once that hits stores on the 20th of January, 2021, I believe.
So we've got yet another cloud solution, but obviously this time on Nintendo, which is quite interesting. So that will pretty much be everyone with a cloud storage system. But there is a slight twist with this one, particularly compared to obviously the Xbox's take on cloud gaming. You have to buy the games.
Yes, so it's almost like, it's not like Game Pass or anything like that. You're literally still paying for the game, but you're almost paying for the token to access it via streaming, if that makes sense. So you download. So I've actually had a go of the trial myself, which I found actually very interesting to play, and it actually worked flawlessly for me. And what I found interesting was that there's actually two modes of streaming available to you. You download the application, and it's almost like the client to start the streaming service. But it puts you to a little menu, and you can pick either performance or graphics modes, which I found interesting. Now, at the time, I only tried performance mode. I went to try graphics mode at a later point, but then it put me into a queue, and I think I was about 1,700th and something in the line. So I thought, well, I'm not going to wait to play this game. But that was an interesting factor there, that you couldn't just jump on straight away. There was a queue to get on, but I think that's mainly possibly Nintendo maybe gauging server capacity to interest kind of thing, and then obviously that will expand and increase over time. But I think my experience with the performance mode at least was flawless, and this was on handheld mode as well, and I was probably as far away as I could be from my home router as I could be at the time. And I had no input lag, I had no stuttering, no graphical glitches or anything like that, and it ran very well. So if this is what's to come for bigger budget titles or bigger technical titles to come to the system through streaming, then I think it is a viable option. I mean, of course, people have said that, well, the whole point of the Switch is that it's portable. So if you're in your car somewhere and you haven't got a Wi-Fi hotspot, then you can't play. And you think, well, that's the caveat of it, right? But from what I've seen so far, it does behave really well.
Well, there's a couple of interesting points that I pick out of this. The first one being that obviously cloud gaming is something that's obviously a hot potato at the moment, and is the reason they're having to stream these games via cloud service, obviously because the handheld device just isn't powerful enough to play them. But we have another console launching that could be in that bracket to a certain degree, and that's probably the Xbox Series S, to be honest. And I'm guessing that Microsoft and perhaps some of the legacy Xbox One consoles as well, that perhaps they're not up to coping with the latest software demands. So perhaps game streaming is the way forward for them as well. I mean, I know Game Pass has been teased on those sort of systems as well. But the other thing is obviously that spending that 40, well, however much it costs, putting down.
I don't know specifically, unfortunately, but I think we're talking around £50 here, £49.99,
right.
I believe.
So to lay that down for a game that you never physically own is kind of a stretch for me personally, because I know if you download games, so if I was to buy an online game or buy it from the online store on Microsoft, for instance, I can at least download the game, store that on a storage device. So in, I don't know, 10 years time, as long as my storage device is held up, I should still be able to play that game, as it were. But you are at the mercy of these companies not switching off the servers or disbanding that particular game. And I guess one of the advantages of Game Pass is the fact that it's just a subscription model. So you don't actually pay and technically own these games. So it's an interesting development, but obviously Nintendo, along with Stadia and Luna, all look like they're going down a similar route. So at this moment, it seems like Microsoft are pretty much the only ones that are doing the sort of subscription service, perhaps other than the Sony PlayStation Now.
So that's mainly for PlayStation 3 titles and some PS4, I believe. But whether that expands, I imagine that will expand into the PS5 era. I'd be surprised if they don't try to expand PS Now onto PlayStation 5. But as you say, interesting with Nintendo, though, I mean, they've always been a bit behind the curve when it comes to online and multiplayer-based stuff, right? So one of the things which they have done with the Switch, which hasn't really gained much traction, but rather than having to constantly buy, say, like the original Super Mario Brothers or the old Zelda games or whatever, if you have the Nintendo Switch online subscription, you do have access to the NES and the SNES collection, application that they have. So you can you're not streaming, you're almost kind of on the fly downloading them, because obviously they're so small in size. So they kind of have something there, but it's not really streaming. And maybe in the future that Nintendo will eventually go to streaming, but I think they do take a lot longer to evaluate these technologies before they push them out to the users, as opposed to being a forerunner front runner, in these endeavors.
It's interesting times, and like I say, we're only getting more and more streaming services come online, and I still don't feel like it's fully taken yet. So I'm surprised all of these companies are sort of throwing all of their eggs in the streaming basket at the moment before it's fully proved. And I'm obviously slightly biased towards Xbox, but I personally think they've got the best setup at the moment, particularly with the subscription service. So let's move on. So talking about Series S. There's been a few consoles leak into the wild a week early, actually. There was a Series S in Montreal leak. So someone lucky has had the Series S turn up on their home, and I'm guessing they're able to play it. But also this week, there was a Series X turn up for someone in Portugal. And that one was slightly different because that actually came from a Microsoft store. The person had bought it through a Microsoft store. And I think it was actually delivered via the Netherlands, actually. I think it came from, Microsoft must have a warehouse in the Netherlands, and it came from there. But there's not loads of these. It's not like the floodgates have opened. There's the odd one leaking here and there. It's just strange, isn't it, how the odd one seems to slip through the net.
And we're all sitting here thinking, what a lucky person. Well, we wish we were that one guy, right?
Exactly. I think loads of people are hitting the refresh button on their their email app just to see if the status has changed and whatever. But so a couple of lucky people out there, other than obviously the YouTubers that have got the early access to these. A few normal people like us are actually playing their next generation console early. But we've got 5 days to wait, so I'm sure I can wait that long. Again, talking about the Series S, because of people like Jeff Grubb and the embargo that's been lifted around the information on these systems, we now have an official storage capacity, don't we? So it actually comes with 512 gigabytes storage, I believe. But after the operating system and things like the quick resume, all of the reserve space that's needed, we are left with 364 gigabytes, which isn't a huge amount.
No, it's not. I mean, a lot of people have said, it's not to be unexpected, as a lot of people online are saying, this is what we expect of it. But of course, this does now lead into the problem of, games aren't getting smaller anymore. Specifically with that comparison, people are saying, but the original Xbox One had 512, so it's not a problem. And it's like, but back in 2013, games weren't as big back then, whereas now we've got things like Call of Duty, which are hitting 250 gig. I mean, God, that's going to take up your Xbox is just a Call of Duty machine, surely, at that point. But it can't be helped.
It's interesting you say that, because actually the Series S actually ends up with roughly the same amount of storage as you, like you say, the original Xbox One. That was around 360 gigabytes, because that obviously came with a 0.5 terabyte drive as well.
Yeah.
But as you say, obviously back in those days in 2013, there was an awful lot of physical media still out there, and obviously games were limited to the size that you could get on a disc. Whereas nowadays, what tends to happen is, even if you buy the game on a disc, it still has a 60 gig update to do on top of, obviously installing it from the disk and stuff. So game sizes have got exponentially larger.
The other side of the coin is that, unfortunately, it is understandable these things can't be helped, because even though SSDs are slowly becoming more mainstream from the PC perspective, SSDs in general are still really expensive for high capacity chips, effectively, for these things. So it's unfortunate, but it is understandable why Xbox went for the lower bracket to keep the system at low cost, right? If they went for the 1 terabyte, then you're probably paying 350 odd
exactly
for it. So
I was going to say, and even more, and at that point, it kind of negates the whole point of the Series S, doesn't it? So
exactly.
There are options. You can buy obviously the £200 Seagate expansion. Why would you? Don't really know.
Yeah.
But you can obviously store games on the external storage, and if it's an SSD, you can obviously run Xbox One and 360 games directly from that. So we've covered this many times. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised, because one of the things that Jeff Grubb did mention was that actually that the Series S games aren't that much smaller than the Series X games, if at all. And that kind of neatly brings us on to our next topic, actually, which the final size of Call of Duty on day one, because I can only imagine it's going to get patched and obviously more content's going to turn up. But the day one size for Xbox Series X is 136 gigabytes, I believe. Is that correct? Let's have a look. 136 gigabytes. That's quite sizable.
Well, more specifically, that's Series X and S. There is no difference here, which I think is what surprised us the most, because we expected to maybe see a lower file size for the Series S, because it doesn't have to have those 4K textures. But I mean 1440p textures, I imagine, are obviously still going to take enough space on there. But maybe whether or not the game potentially upscales to 4K using those 1440p textures, I mean, we don't know, do we? But maybe that's the reason why it's about the same size.
Well, we've got the sizes here, actually. And as you can see, the Series X/S has got the largest file size out of all of them, 3 gig larger than the PS5. Obviously, significantly larger than the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And PC, as you can see, is all split into different categories there, which I believe the Xbox Series X was going to be as well. I think you could potentially download the single player and multiplayer in separate packs, but obviously it looks like there's an ultra settings for PC on there, and looking at the size of that, you'd like to think that the Xbox Series X, S and PS5 are kind of getting the ultra settings pack, the high res 4K images as well. But
I mean, for PC, for the current Modern Warfare, I mean, there was no option at all, unlike console, to uninstall the bits that you don't use. For PC, you had to install the whole lot, no matter if you never played single player, you're out of luck there. You still had to download the full thing. So maybe those PlayStation 5 and Series console file sizes, maybe that's just considering the full game. Maybe I'm sure they have confirmed, I believe, that you can still uninstall those parts of the game you don't use.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, once you're done with the single player, it's just a waste sitting on your hard drive at that
exactly.
point. So it'd be absolutely fantastic if you could delete those. It has been mentioned. It just doesn't mention it in that little write up there, which surprised me a little bit. But it doesn't mean to say it's not coming and not happening. But what did surprise me was the fact that the X and the S have got exactly the same file size. So that's that's a bit of a surprise. Moving on, Ori and the Will of the Wisps has been in the news again today, and for the right reasons. And it's going to render at 6K. Now, this is the second game that I've heard is going to do that on the Series X, rendering at 6K, and then super sampled down to 4K. So, I mean, that should look really sharp. And I'm guessing they don't need any anti-aliasing whatsoever. It's a really beautiful looking game as it is, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, I mean,
for that.
the first one, just to clarify, obviously was the Tourist,
Mhm.
which they've stated that yes, it's 6K downsampled to 4K, which, as you say, is absolutely fantastic. I mean, as we've said before, with regards to that one, I mean, the game isn't graphically taxing in any way. That the worlds are
No.
very small, they're all isolated, so there's not much to render there. But regardless of that, especially with Ori and the Blind Forest as well, because there's a lot. I mean, yes, it's all just like detailed artwork and stuff, but I'd argue that it's still not very heavy in terms of the resources required. But what it does show or showcase is how powerful the Series X is. That actually this game, with very minimal optimization to support the new system, actually can support resolutions of that magnitude.
Who saw this coming? Yeah, who saw 6K games coming? Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know that they obviously touted that the Series X can support games up to 8K, which is clearly true. Obviously, with HDMI 2.1, it's technically true, but whether it was actually ever going to be able to do that, well, having a couple of games that aren't even really optimized for the system already running at 6K, and like you say, okay, they're indie games, they're not massively taxing on the hardware, but the fact that you can do it is pretty phenomenal, really.
Yeah, as you say, it's the point that the Series X has the capability to render it at 6K to then downsample. Because yes, nobody has a 6K or an 8K TV panel in their living rooms or something. Or if you do, you're very lucky if you're one of the few that have the prototypes or whatever that do exist. But it's just showing the raw power of this machine. And I read saw something earlier today as well about some other. I think it was Gears 5. That was being compared against PC on ultra settings, and to get the same level of detail, I mean, I believe this person was running the latest 2080 Ti with, an Intel i9, and those two components on their own, I mean, you're talking £1,000 plus.
Yeah, easy. Yeah,
and you're getting the same performance from a £450 box. I mean, that is what's phenomenal about this, isn't it?
You're actually getting better performance because obviously PC doesn't have the ultra settings, beyond ultra settings that the Series X has. So they can't even compare the PC to the Series X at the moment because it's actually got higher settings than the highest ones on the PC currently. Yeah. Although the PC is getting the same ultra settings as the Series X apparently. But and just out of interest, yeah, The Tourist, I love that game, great game. But it also runs at 4K on the Series S, which we've mentioned a few times. But again, it just goes to show you the power of these machines because, for a machine that was supposed to be a 1440/1080p machine, to have The Tourist running at 4K is brilliant.
Again, it just, even for a smaller system, like it just shows the power of the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think it just gives us hope and, enjoyment, that actually anticipation, I should say, that these systems are really next gen. This is what we're going to start seeing. It's the performance of the future games to come. It's not just about graphical leaps and bounds anymore. It's about what else these systems can be used for to deliver great gameplay and great content.
Well, I mean, as 8K TVs perhaps they'll become more popular. I mean, there are obviously 8K TVs out in the wild. It does make me wonder if there might be a setting at some point in the future where you can actually output at 6K and then your TV will upscale it to 8K.
Well, that kind of comes back to the argument of, will we get a mid-generation refresh? I imagine most people's thoughts are we probably will see one at some point in maybe 3-4 years, but we don't know. Who's to say? But
no, I personally think we will.
Pipeline. I'd be. I mean, whether or not I do or don't believe in it, I can see it happening.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of out of our hands. Actually,
exactly. Yeah.
So we had some rumors as well. Well, actually, some leaked documents about an old Xbox One game that could potentially either be getting a sequel or may have been considered for a sequel, and that is obviously Ryse 2. That's been in the news lately. There were some leaked documents from Crytek, and that was one of the games that seemed like, I think it was codename Ryse Next, something like that. And I think lots of people have been getting excited around the fact that there could actually be a Ryse Son of Rome 2. I really loved that game. I think it got caught up in the storm that existed at the beginning of the Xbox One era around, the whole 1080p versus 900p thing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately kind of got overlooked, was underrated.
It was an Xbox One launch title, wasn't it, I believe?
It was. And I think the other thing that probably damaged its reputation, as it were, is it obviously had Kinect implementation early on. That got removed towards the end, I believe. I think you could still talk to it and ask your armies to, fire a barrage of arrows and stuff like that. But obviously, Connect wasn't flavor of the month at the beginning of the Xbox One generation, so I think that may have tainted the game as well. But I personally think it's a fantastic game, and if a sequel were to come around, that would be brilliant. I know there was some sort of legal wrangling around the IP and who owns the IP, because I think Microsoft, back in the beginning of the Xbox One days, were perhaps a little bit more lenient towards this kind of thing, and the legal aspect of IPs and stuff. And I think Microsoft want to own the Ryse 2 IP, and I don't think Crytek really wanted to let it go. So there was some legal wrangling around there. And again, we don't know whether this is something that's actually currently being created as we speak, or if it was just something that was toyed with and has been shelved since. But I know, looking at the community on Twitter and stuff like that, there's lots of hype and excitement that this game could actually be coming. So I hope Microsoft and Crytek pay attention to that and make it happen, because I think, graphically, it still stands up to this very day as a fantastic looking game. And to imagine that on the next generation Series X console, that would be phenomenal.
Oh, 100%. I mean, unfortunately, as you say, I've not played this game, but I do remember the E3 when it was announced. And I remember thinking, wow, that game looks really good. But again, the controversies around the Xbox, and I ended up not getting the Xbox One and never really got around to playing it. So it sounds like something I should definitely go back to play once I have the Series X, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. And it would be nice if they could show it a little bit of love, actually, on the Series X, and perhaps, get it as running as high a frame rate and resolution as they can. That would be a nice game for them to show some love towards, to be honest, because it is a great game. And unfortunately, the beginning of the Xbox generation did kind of taint it slightly. But no, I absolutely love it as a game. And one last one, Amazon have filed a patent that kind of took us by surprise a little bit, didn't it? Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this came out a few days ago on GameIndustry.biz, actually, and a bit interesting bit of news. So apparently, Amazon are in the final filings of to patent a technology that they've come up with about how to handle toxic players online.
Well, good luck with that.
And the short answer to this is actually that Amazon's solution, using a patented algorithm of their own, is the best way to deal with toxic players is actually to group all the toxic players together in a matchmaking session. So they've actually released a few statements and comments about this, saying that most systems and companies that try to implement matchmaking systems only do it, or for the large majority, it's solely skill-based.
Yes.
And the apparent belief between developers and other publishers and other people in the business is that players, when it comes to matchmaking, players only enjoy playing with people of their same skill level or just above to challenge them, which further evidence has suggested, through Amazon at least, that that's actually not quite the case. What people deal with being fair matchmaking is also beyond that. It's also the more human element that some people might
behaviors.
Exactly. So some people might want to be with people or play with other players who don't shout, don't throw curse words or bad language in a game. But then, of course, there is then the limits there about, to throw curse words in an online game isn't necessarily toxic behavior, because other players may be okay with that. So then the question has become, what is deemed toxic? And I think it's again, these Amazon statements here are going down the line of, leaving matches early if you're not doing very well or your team's not doing very well is deemed or can be deemed toxic behavior. So it's almost like a strike against your name if you consistently leave games early, if you're not playing well enough, or if you start blaming the team. And then if this carries on, then the idea is that you get marked as a toxic player, and then all the toxic players get mashed together.
Well, I mean, Xbox Live and Microsoft do have something similar, and it does rely on gamers kind of voting people up and down and reporting people and things like that. So that does kind of exist in the Xbox Live kind of world. And I'm not sure about PlayStation. I'm absolutely sure it does on PlayStation as well. But I think two things kind of surprised me is the fact that I guess for Microsoft and perhaps PlayStation, there's a balance between perhaps skill-based matchmaking and obviously behaviors and stuff.
Yes.
I just thought it's quite a good solution to the problem, wasn't it? If you could just bundle all of the toxic players together, that's quite an elegant solution to the problem, perhaps.
Yeah.
But what also surprised me is that Amazon were doing this. So I'm guessing, is this because of Luna? Or I know
maybe. I mean, there's no official statements here, but at least but Amazon do have their own Amazon Game Studio, because they did recently release a game called Crucible. If you may have heard of this, which then got very swiftly withdrawn and cancelled, I believe.
Yeah.
So they are in the game space in some capacity, but I do find it interesting you brought up about Xbox having a kind of similar system, but obviously with user reporting. I think this is the difference between what Amazon are proposing and what currently exists, because the current solutions are that the players themselves will be the ones to report the behavior, but then these systems can be abused by players to almost threaten genuine players by saying, oh, I'm going to report you for this, when actually you've not been behaving badly or wrongly at all. So the idea of Amazon's system is that this is done through AI. This is actually analyzed through systems and not through human beings and humans reporting others.
It's an interesting point, and obviously, there's been I call it controversy, around Sony being able to listen into private chat and stuff in parties and groups and stuff, and apparently that's been around in Xbox for a long time, so that's nothing new, and can be used to verify, bad language or any reports that come through and stuff. But I believe that there is an element of human and manual control over that. So if someone put a report in, someone would have to physically go and listen to that conversation. But it's interesting that perhaps AI is the answer to this, to try and pick it up. But it just seems strange that Amazon were doing this. But yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is that the original filing for this patent was actually way back in 2017, and it's only very recently now when it's actually reached its final stages of the patent filing. So yeah, it's been in the pipeline for a long time by the sounds of it. So we'll have to see what's to come.
It's going to be a very interesting gaming space in the coming generation, because not only have we got obviously hardware to play our games on, we've also got streaming services, as we mentioned at the top of the show, and every single person now has a streaming service. And obviously with Stadia and Luna, it is kind of their only kind of gaming platform on a large scale level that they've got. So they're obviously putting a lot of money and effort into that. But it's going to be a very interesting playing field come this generation.
Oh, definitely.
That kind of wraps up the show, to be honest. Thank you for that, Pucks.
No, you're very welcome.
Yeah, like I say, we are 5 days away from next generation. We've got 2 podcasts coming up. We've got our normal Sunday podcast where we're going to say goodbye to the Xbox One. Please tune in for that. It's going to be a great show. We've got some giveaways. We've got 2 3-month Game Pass Ultimate giveaways to give away, one on the Sunday show. And we've also got our Next Gen Eve special Game Pass Gaming podcast on Monday the 9th, which is 8 p.m. British time, 3 p.m. Eastern and 12 noon Pacific. Please like, share and subscribe if you like this channel or if you like the content you've seen. Puxley, thank you for being with us. It's always a pleasure.
Oh, you're very welcome. I always love talking games and news. So anytime, I love doing this.
Exactly. But thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next one.